questions in advance and everything. Oh, yeah. You retired?
I was gonna say, it's like he's retired.
Yeah. Winter, it's
They'll be all
cold.
ready.
That way you get the word in edgewise at this dinner.
No golf.
See?
Good point.
No golf to be played tomorrow, right? I saw somebody out there today. Okay, Dave.
Nice for tomorrow.
I think it's in fifties tomorrow.
50s tomorrow.
Yeah.
We're listening.
The day before it was like 60.
Oh, yeah.
I first came out here, yeah, I've been here like 3 or 4 days. We go to Association in September 1, had a huge blizzard. Didn't snow again until after Christmas. You know,
If it was tease us about moving to Colorado for retirement instead of Arizona. Right. I said, no, but we'll never get it anymore. If it's cold and snowy. I look out the window and
I'm probably sure me first bag of snacks.
Go back to bed.
make another
First dinner,
cup of
feed.
coffee.
Yeah. Couple days later, maybe I didn't try it.
Okay, I think everybody who's gonna be here is here so far, so we're gonna call to order the town board special meeting for Monday, November 4th. This is a town board special meeting, so we will start this evening with roll call. Ms. Iker?
Mayor Christine Melendez,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Ken Bennett,
Here,
Miles Baker,
Here.
Barry Wilson,
Here.
Paul Rennemeyer,
Here?
Tom Jones,
Here.
David Sosowski.
Here.
Okay. Second item is review of agenda by the board and additional items of new business to the agenda for consideration.
I move we approve the agenda as presented.
second.
Motion on the floor from Mr. Baker with a second from Mayor Pro Tem Bennett to accept the agenda as presented. All in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda is approved as presented. So next item will be to move item B, an executive session.
Madam Mayor, I move that we move into executive session pursuant to Colorado Revised Statutes 24-6-402, subsection 4E and I, for the purpose of determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiations, and instructing negotiators with respect for certain economic development incentives as presented by Stacy Miller, Director of Economic Development.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor and a second to move into executive session. All in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We will excuse the folks not participating and then move in.
Take leaves from your property into the streets. Leaves on your property are your responsibility. If our machines become damaged, sweeping service stops, which impacts everyone. Also, if possible, park in your driveway during the fall instead of on the street. Doing so allows our sweepers to move right along the curbs and collect all the leaves on the roadway, preventing storm drains from becoming clogged in the event of a storm. To learn more about our street sweeping operations, visit windsorgov.com/street sweeping. Fall is here, which means turkey, pumpkin spice, and of course, leaves. With the season in full swing, the town of Windsor is hard at work keeping our streets and storm drains clear. Every year, Windsor Public Works staff sweep about 7,000 miles of streets and highways within town limits. Our street sweeping operations are important for 3 reasons. First, piles of leaves and twigs can clog storm drains, potentially causing flooding of streets and intersections. Second, decomposing leaves can make their way into the Poudre River, causing harmful accumulations of nutrients in the water, which leads to algae growth and poor water quality. And finally, clean streets are aesthetically pleasing and help keep our town looking beautiful. To help keep our street sweeping operation running efficiently and effectively, please follow these tips during street sweeping season. Do not blow or rake leaves from your property into the streets. Leaves on your property are your responsibility. If our machines become damaged, sweeping service stops, which impacts everyone. Also, if possible, park in your driveway during the fall instead of on the street. Doing so allows our sweepers to move right along the curbs and collect all the leaves on the roadway, preventing storm drains from becoming clogged in the event of a storm. To learn more about our street sweeping operations, visit windsorgov.com/street sweeping. Fall is here, which means turkey, pumpkin spice, and of course, leaves. With the season in full swing, the town of Windsor is hard at work keeping our streets and storm drains clear. Every year, Windsor Public Works staff sweep about 7,000 miles of streets and highways within town limits. Our street sweeping operations are important for 3 reasons. First, piles of leaves and twigs can clog storm drains, potentially causing flooding of streets and intersections. Second, decomposing leaves can make their way into the Poudre River, causing harmful accumulations of nutrients in the water, which leads to algae growth and poor water quality. And finally, cleaned streets are aesthetically pleasing and help keep our town looking beautiful. To help keep our street sweeping operation running efficiently and effectively, please follow these tips during street sweeping season. Do not blow or rake leaves from your property into the streets. Leaves on your property are your responsibility. If our machines become damaged, sweeping service stops, which impacts everyone. Also, if possible, park in your driveway during the fall instead of on the street. Doing so allows our sweepers to move right along the curbs and collect all the leaves on the roadway, preventing storm drains from becoming clogged in the event of a storm. To learn more about our street sweeping operations, visit windsorgov.com/street sweeping. Fall is here, which means turkey, pumpkin spice, and of course, leaves. With the season in full swing, the town of Windsor is hard at work keeping our streets and storm drains clear. Every year, Windsor Public Works staff sweep about 7,000 miles of streets and highways within town limits. Our street sweeping operations are important for 3 reasons. First, piles of leaves and twigs can clog storm drains, potentially causing flooding of streets and intersections. Second, decomposing leaves can make their way into the Poudre River, causing harmful accumulations of nutrients in the water, which leads to algae growth and poor water quality. And finally, cleaned streets are aesthetically pleasing and help keep our town looking beautiful. To help keep our street sweeping operation running efficiently and effectively, please follow these tips during street sweeping season. Do not blow or rake leaves from your property into the streets. Leaves on your property are your responsibility. If our machines become damaged, sweeping service stops, which impacts everyone. Also, if possible, park in your driveway during the fall instead of on the street. Doing so allows our sweepers to move right along the curbs and collect all the leaves on the roadway, preventing storm drains from becoming clogged in the event of a storm. To learn more about our street sweeping operations, visit windsorgov.com/streets.
Yeah, it's,
Johnstown, or out here by like Starbucks?
so it's Johnstown by past Shields, like the railroad tracks and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Where the FedEx building is and
Yeah,
all
yeah,
that stuff.
yeah.
East of.
Is that back way through there? Oh, it's lovely. It's in like new. Yeah, I ran into there, so. So I mean, he was there.
Oh, okay. I'm really competitive.
I just-
Thank you.
Cindy and planning commission folks, you can come join us at the table. I think there's room, and we can pull up a couple more chairs. Are you gonna be in? Okay.
40 years.
But
Sweets of Great Lakes.
Yeah, we can't.
planning commission folks, come join us at the table. We've got room, we can pull up a couple more chairs here, there's a chair there. You're on planning commission.
Guy used to-
But you might wanna go there, because I think they're, so you don't have to go there.
This kind of stuff's not allowed.
Start with me, mister.
Let's make sure it's shaken and not stirred.
Tim Running.
Tim on Paul. Good to meet you.
I will go upstairs. I'll just make a note. As long as you have room, it's gonna be open. Okay, Mr. Hornbeck looks like he's ready, and he's gonna lead the discussion for our next agenda item, which is land use code update. And we want to welcome planning commission members who are joining us.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So we've got 3 major topics on the land use code update tonight. They're kind of in descending order of how far along they are in this process. The zone districts and vehicle access standards are the first topic area. They were presented in a work session in March of this year to this group. and they've been sent out to stakeholders a couple times. So they're essentially, in our opinion, ready for adoption, pending any tweaks or input tonight. The second area we'll cover is the subdivision standards, and that is just the first draft, so I imagine we'll have more discussion and questions on that. And the last section to cover tonight is administration and process, and that's not even in draft form for you yet. We just kind of want to go over some of the key concepts and get your feedback before having it in a draft for you. So the zone districts and vehicle access standards, start with that and give you a recap of where we were in March and where we are now. Some of the big picture items we're looking at changing in this standard, or in this update. One is the organization of the standards, and as we mentioned last time, this approach is kind of providing a menu of options where you look at the zoning, the lot size, what type of access is provided to a lot, and that gives you the standards that are applicable to that lot, things like setbacks, building height, etc. So that general concept has not changed. The other big concept is introduction of a couple of new zone districts, RMU2 being one of those. And the primary thing it does is allow for smaller residential lot development. There are some trade-offs for that smaller lot size in terms of you do have to have some commercial development with it, additional requirements for parks, more pedestrian oriented with detached sidewalks, things like that.
Paul,
Yes.
I'm hesitant to do this because I got a lot of questions, so I don't think we should wait till the end. Setbacks. One of the things I'm interested in is as we look at our master transportation plan, we talk about open space, we talk about certain corridors. If, for instance, there was a residential development going in on the trails, let's say like, I'm going to use the example of fairgrounds, okay? The setback there is a lot more than 10 feet on the rear of those houses, which gives the opportunity to have sidewalk, bike path, landscaping. Does this allow for that type of flexibility? Because it says 10 feet or a rear setback.
Yeah, so
I guess the bigger question, and it's a big question, how is this coordinated with our master transportation plan?
well, I think the transportation plan, it identifies the classification of roadways, fairgrounds
Right.
being a major arterial.
Right.
So it's already identified as needing, I don't remember the exact number, but approximately 150 feet of right-of-way.
Okay.
So that's, if it's not already dedicated right-of-way, any new development that comes in would dedicate that, so.
Okay, so the setback on single family, just pick an example, of 10 foot on the rear. If there was a requirement for 100 feet setback, it would be at 110 feet then.
Well,
Would it?
Ken, I think part of this, I doubt that those homes, that's actually their setback. I'm guessing that's probably dedicated open space to the metro district or HOA. So, and when we get a little bit further, we talk about the open space requirements, the 20% and other things. I think things like what you're talking about could absolutely happen. I don't think there's necessarily a tie into the transportation master plan.
Okay.
I just think when you look at these things together, when you look at the new setbacks plus open space dedications and other things, I think you kind of piece together that kind of development. But it would, we'd never, I don't think we'd require any home to have a 110-foot setback.
No, I wouldn't either.
Yeah.
But my concern is, this is the highway, and you can build 10 feet away from that. That really eliminates any opportunities along that highway for
Yeah.
bike paths,
Right.
landscaping, because I would call some of that, I would consider some of that open space as well.
So, yeah, and the setback is actually within the private property owner's
Within-
lot.
Okay.
So it's not part of the street right of way.
So we would not be giving up the opportunity to do some creative things along certain arterials.
Right. the
Okay, that's my
setback
concern.
Is on private
Building to the
property.
property line.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay, so it depends on where they're proper, okay, that helps me. Thank you.
But as long as my colleague brought up setbacks, Only because I
I got
had
a
a
lot of
question.
questions.
Wait, can you guys, when you are talking about a particular page, will you reference it so that we can, or those of us who are following along can maybe,
Right.
I think that would be helpful.
I had read the memo first, most of my questions
I
were
did too.
generated from that, not the slide deck.
Oh,
Yeah.
So on
that's what I
page 2 of the
did.
cover memo,
Yeah,
speaking about residential rear setbacks, it says that the draft had increased rear setbacks from 5 to 8, and then based on feedback,
page 2.
we compromised at 10. And does it make sense? Where'd that, 5 or 8, I know, let's do 10. So I'm curious, first of all, compromise implies you compromise with someone. So what was the tension between the rear setback?
So current rear setback is 5 feet. We identified that as potentially problematic. When you get a neighbor putting an addition 2 stories, 5 feet from your fence, it probably,
Right.
most people wouldn't be too thrilled. So we wanted to increase that. Initially, we had proposed 15 feet. We got some pushback from the stakeholder community,
Sure.
so we landed on 8 feet back in March. Based on discussion from this group at that meeting, we thought 10 feet was more reasonable. I think you shared some of our concerns about that. So the compromise was from 15
Really with the stakeholders?
to 5, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Under that scenario, 10 feet is not that much if someone's building a second story onto it.
Right.
Right, it's more than we have now. And I think it's in line with most communities.
Do HOAs or metro districts have a further setback, or is that not within their?
An HOA, I think, could have further.
They can be more
Under
strict?
architectural review committees, we would have that.
Yeah, they can be more strict,
Just not less.
Right.
So that,
Yeah,
Army,
10.
so RMU2, again, introducing some of the smaller lot sizes. SF2 is a similar concept at a lower intensity without the apartments and commercial. And multifamily zones were combined. We have MF1, MF2 now. There's not a huge need for the 2, and similar with the state zones, combining those into a single district. So those were some of the bigger picture items. The one of the bigger discussion items in March was the density, and with going to the smaller lot sizes, would that translate into higher density? So I wanted to hit on that again, because I don't feel like I provided a very clear answer back in March. But the simple answer is no, density would not increase. The longer answer is the zone districts like RMU2 would allow for pockets of higher density within an overall development, where you could do smaller lot sizes, but you'd have to balance that out overall with more open space or larger estate homes elsewhere.
And I just want to mention for the board, part of this conversation is, we talked about the ultimate population of Windsor and as we grow, how that looks, and I think the key concept was if we're able to cluster residential development and keep more open space around it, maybe as the population grows, we may be a larger number than we may want to be, but it wouldn't feel like a large number. So how do you accommodate this growth? One way would be to cluster the development into smaller sections, keep more common open space and limited common elements. And so as we grow, we don't feel like we're just every corner having single family homes.
So part of that, setting the density, it would still, some of the same rules would still apply that apply today. The future land use map in the comprehensive plan essentially sets the zoning sets the density along with things like the sewer capacity. So we have sewer studies that have been done that account for what the density will be. So if you wanted to go to a higher density, you would need to show you have the utility capacity. Town board would need to amend the the land use map, and also a master plan if that were applicable to the site. So you wouldn't be entitled to any higher density with this zoning unless you really had a lot of other hoops to jump through if you wanted to pursue that.
Paul, so if you averaged all these densities and threw in the open space and everything else, do you have a figure that comes out per lot for the
Well,
RMU?
the SF1, which is, as well as the RMU, which is the yellow and orange on the map, that was master plan for the sewer at 4 units an acre, and that's 10,000 square foot lots. If you include roads and things, maybe it's closer to the 6,000 that we see with most subdivisions.
Okay.
So the new zone districts would still be subject to all of those, really the 3 items I had mentioned.
Paul, I
Yeah.
have a question on the multifamily. What's the rationale to combine those two?
There's really no clear distinction of when or where or why currently MF1 versus MF2 would apply. And there's really only the difference of the density of, I think it's 18 units an acre versus 24 or something like that. And we haven't, in the past, we haven't seen the distinction of those two, you know,
Well, everyone's just gonna go for the highest density then.
which is kind of what happens now anyway.
Yeah. I just remember when we rezoned out off Highland Meadows for those apartments, like, people were angry enough about multifamily, and then it got ratcheted up to the high density, and I think that just blew it up. Maybe it wouldn't have mattered, they were angry anyway, but I was just wondering why.
There's also some current land in the code, it kind of has some overlap, and it's not really clear, the distinction, like Paul said, between the MF1 and MF2. And most of the multifamily development that we see today is in the RMU zone district anyway. We really don't have a whole lot of straight MF1 or MF2 zoning, so trying to eliminate some of that ambiguity.
So hopefully that provides more clarity on density. Some of the other issues, so this is something we're hearing from stakeholders, was the residential rear setbacks, which we mentioned. I think I covered that. Is there a need to go into that further at all? No. So the next issue we had heard about was the RMU2, maybe some of those requirements being overly restrictive on the smaller lots. And those are the 4,000 to 6,000 square foot range. So we've tweaked that to be a little bit less restrictive. We're still requiring what we call limited access, where when you have these smaller lots, you end up with garage face after garage face unless you have some additional standards. So we're still trying to avoid garage after garage by either having the garage set back a little bit from a front porch or from the front of the house, or you can do a side access where you come in and turn into the lot. So I think we've reached kind of a middle ground that stakeholders were happier with, and I think still achieves the vision for that. There's also concern from stakeholders about the minimum amount of commercial acreage in the RMU2 development. So to address that, we've added an alternative compliance section which allows the decision maker, so town board or planning commission or planning department, depending on what kind of development and who's making the decision, but it allows them to waive the commercial requirement in certain instances if it's adjacent to existing commercial, for example, and there's not really a market for more commercial, or it's kind of off of when it's not located on the arterial with, visibility for commercial, there are options to waive that requirement. Final issue from stakeholders was lot widths. We currently don't really have lot widths, which can lead to lots being platted that are a little too narrow. Then when they come back to develop them, they find out they're too narrow and have to replat the lot line. To avoid those situations, we've introduced the lot width minimum there was concern that this was, again, maybe overly restrictive. So the approach is we've added if there's a concurrent site plan that shows the layout works, then the lot width can be reduced. So that's really a summary of where we stand on the zone districts and vehicle access standards.
So I just want to follow up on something you just said. So the lot width can be reduced, but not to, it has to stay at least at the minimum. Is there a minimum requirement though? But even the minimum requirement, can they?
So I didn't maybe clarify enough. This is for non-residential type development.
Oh.
Residential would still have a hard minimum.
Okay.
Commercial, industrial, wouldn't be a minimum if they can show in the
It's
site
more
plan
flexible.
that it works.
With some of these smaller lot sizes, is there something in the standards, or are we looking at something that deals with height of single-family homes? Because I know currently, 2-story homes is the standard, but I know like at the planning conference, when they had that session on small lot homes, I mean, they were going some lots as small as 2,500 square feet. But they were building houses that they were essentially detached townhomes, so they were 3 and 4 stories tall. Is that something that's addressed?
Yeah, I believe we're sticking with the minimum height of 35, which is what we have now. And it's interesting to bring up that example because it's one that was shown to us as some stakeholders would like to be able to do that without a PUD or some other process. We felt that was a little too dense, too much for Windsor, kind of as a by right development, but it would be an option through the PUD where they set their own kind of development standards. So next steps on zoning was just presented. Pending any additional comments, that we do believe it's ready for adoption and public hearings.
Don't read into my question, I'm just asking this. 100 and some odd pages of what we read for our packet tonight. Is this an adopted or an amended rule package from like another community that we kind of took and then wanted to modify, et cetera? I'm not giving you credit for, I mean, I will give you credit for 115 pages or whatever, but I was just curious if this was something that we had adopted or looked at from another community, kind of took their template or their framework and then, so we weren't recreating the wheel on all of this new
Yeah, I
code.
can't take credit for reinventing the wheel. I think it is, the vast majority is taken from other communities, bits and pieces. There's no one, I would say Longmont and Loveland are 2 communities that updated their codes recently that we looked at those heavily and relied on those. So a lot of it's taken from them.
I just wanted to make sure we were copying others or, getting in line with where other communities are doing.
We never get to this point. You're right at all.
So I'm interested in hearing from anybody from Planning Commission if these changes become embedded as part of the code. I mean, based on what you deal with, you think these will fly? Nobody will, have an issue for the most part?
Well, Mayor, if I can pick up on that, the other was sort of the change in review body. So some of the issues used to come before planning won't anymore, and some of the things used to come before the board won't. Have you guys thought about, are you giving up some turf that you feel you should have a say? From the slide on that, the conditional use permit goes from town board to the planning.
Is that
commission.
something that you were
Can
going
you
to
go to
talk
that
about?
slide, Paul?
I don't think he's quite there yet, David.
Oh, I thought he was wrapping it up.
Did you?
No, so I haven't reached that point yet.
This is just one section.
Yeah, so this is essentially the first section. So
We're doing 3 sections.
I was ready for the wrap.
There was
This is a zone districts and vehicle access standards. That's what I think he's taking these in sections. So this is the first section. Any other questions or concerns? Is everybody okay with moving ahead with what you've been presented to date on zone districts and vehicle access standards?
I don't know I don't know where my question applies. It may apply to this slide, it may apply to a later.
No, I promise we're gonna cover it. in
He's
the
coming,
next
it's
slide.
coming up.
We will
Cover
cover
what?
that. We will,
We don't know my other question. I didn't.
well, the one that you just asked though.
Oh, well, there's that one. Okay, I'll wait. I will, I'm putting a footnote. Maybe I agree with everything that's been
Well,
presented.
wait, you wanna ask any other questions, see if
He's
you
over
apply
20
now?
questions for tonight.
You reserve the
No,
right to cross
I'll wait till some other slide.
Okay. Okay, so I think in general, I think we have, I mean,
Because they're all
in
related.
general, I think everybody's in agreement. And this all ran by developers, and it sounded like that was in the general consensus as well.
See this slide later.
Okay.
That question.
I mean, it's not like we can't come back to any of these, but
Right.
we can take it all as a whole, but I think in sections, it makes it easier. Okay.
All right, thank you. Yeah, next section is the subdivision section, and this is all new stuff to you that hasn't been presented yet. So I do expect more questions, comments, things. So one of the main themes in the comprehensive plan, and that we've heard in working on the transportation master plan, similar planning efforts, is connectivity in the town, and kind of a lack of connectivity. A lot of the traffic is funneled onto, 392, a few of the main routes that everyone needs to rely on. So we're trying to have better connectivity and not always rely on some of those main arterials. So we've got really three methods within development to help towards that goal. Currently the land use code does not really address connectivity at all.
Right.
So these are generally newer concepts that we're looking to incorporate. One of the concepts is the distance between block lengths, essentially. So downtown Windsor, this area, from 3rd Street to 4th Street, on average, those are about 440-foot long blocks, which is pretty typical of older development or a downtown type development. These shorter blocks help create a more connected street grid, and they reduce trip lengths, especially for people on foot or on bike, and providing a more direct route. And these are just some illustrations of what a grid network does for getting from A to B, from your home to your school, versus a more curvilinear network of cul-de-sacs that aren't well connected. The code currently has a maximum block length of 1,500 feet, which is insufficient for creating that more connected network. So what's proposed in the draft code is block lengths of 660 feet to 1,320, and it depends on the context of the zoning. So the RMU2, that zone, the new zone that is a little bit more, potentially more intense with the smaller lot sizes and things, those are really more compact developments. So those would have a 660-foot maximum, which is about 1/8 of a mile. And then general, which would be really the RMU1, SF1, which is how most of town has developed, would be 880 feet, and that's about 1/6 of a mile. And then there are kind of the more remote campus type developments, so industrial parks, the estate homes, things like that. And those would have a 1,320 foot, which is a 1/4 mile maximum.
Well, is our goal to discourage cul-de-sacs going forward?
Generally, yes.
Are any of the new developments coming in with those
Yeah, so
cul-de-sacs?
that's really the second point of connectivity is cul-de-sacs. So in this table, there's also limits on cul-de-sacs in terms of, in the compact development context, they're generally prohibited, except when an exception is granted due to topography, existing street network, things like that, where you really don't have a better option. And then,
I was just gonna say, can you maybe give an overview of the difference between the RMU 1 and 2 and how the RMU 1 is today's standard versus RMU 2 is providing the smaller lots and things like that, and it's more of an incentive to go with the new standard and limit cul-de-sacs. So instead of discouraging cul-de-sacs, I would say we're incentivizing or encouraging developers to go with the RMU 2 because it provides some of the flexibility in the smaller lots that they want. It just would limit cul-de-sacs and provide better connectivity. Is that?
You nailed it, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Well, I'm going back to my first year on the board. I asked questions about the grid pattern. And we had a study presented to us back then about this, so I'm glad to see it moving in that direction. And the cul-de-sacs have been a problem, even though some of us might like living on them. My question, are these new codes strong enough to do what you're talking about, Scott, to really encourage a non-cul-de-sac and to encourage a grid pattern? Or do they need to be more restrictive?
Well, actually, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but I think a lot of the newer subdivisions that we're seeing are already kind of going in that direction towards more of a grid system. So I think there's somewhat of an acknowledgement out there already that we need to have more connectivity. And so some of the subdivisions that Planning Commission and Town Board have seen lately aren't as cul-de-sac heavy as they used to be, but we're hoping that these incentives are strong enough and they're similar to things like the Rain Dance subdivision standards that were adopted with that PUD. The challenge is like balance and having flexibility. Absolutely have to have flexibility because there could be conditions that really warrant a cul-de-sac or a non-grid pattern. I get that. But if I'm a developer and I came in today and I wanted to have all cul-de-sacs, what would stop me from doing that? Because I can get more money for a house on a cul-de-sac. Is there anything in here that would prevent me from doing that?
Yeah, so
Okay.
if you're in the RMU 2, they would be prohibited unless an exception were granted based on topography or things like that. Which, as Scott said, it's kind of the incentive of using the RMU 2. One of the trade-offs is no cul-de-sacs are very limited. In the more general context, under our current RMU, RMU 1, SF 1, they're more discouraged. We didn't want to take away something that people are used to using, but discouraging them, limiting them.
The 600-foot maximum block length.
Mhm.
You know, I'm not a town planner, so but that's 280 feet difference. It's a football field almost. It seems like that would almost limit the opportunities for cul-de-sacs, or that almost forces a grid. Am I correct?
The 660?
The 600 maximum length on a block? Or does that need, or does that need to be even smaller? What's Old Town?
About 440, yeah. I mean, you could still do cul-de-sacs with 660.
Same concept I'm pursuing. Are these strict enough to do what we want to do?
I think
Without
in our,
any flexibility, okay.
yeah, I think in the compact context, like the RMU 2, yeah. In the general, I think that's
In the general, you know.
the general context, RMU 1, SF 1. That's maybe more debatable whether it.
Yeah, you
How
might
far do
get
you
some
wanna
in,
go?
in the RMU 1, but
Right.
if you look at in 2, first and foremost, the first line that they have to follow, they're prohibited.
Right. It's prohibited, right?
Except, I mean, there's an exception, but
Paul, I guess just to tag on, your thinking is that RMU 2 is going to be more desirable for developers going forward. That's kind of like the new thing. So they're going to want to do that anyway, Ken. They want to be in the RMU 2, and that's where we're forcing the limited cul-de-sacs on. Because when I first got on the board, I think we looked at something like this, and a big developer came back and said, no, cul-de-sacs. And he showed us pictures of different areas in the cul-de-sacs. The crime was lower and all this stuff.
Sure.
But that person, if they want cul-de-sacs, will have to go RMU 1.
Correct, yeah.
And then again, there are, with that note, our RMU 1 is still limited to 10% of the overall homes.
Right.
So there's still a cap. I think even if they choose that density, we've still cap the amount.
If you want this density, you can't put
Right.
in all these cul-de-sacs.
And I think cul-de-sacs make sense in some areas. I'm more concerned about the grid pattern, because I see so many neighborhoods that there's two ways in, and you have, especially school time, you have backup traffic things. So the more we encourage a grid pattern, the better traffic patterns we're gonna have. That's one of my big goals for our town, is better traffic patterns, so.
What's also something related to like whatever's trending, right? So back in
Yeah.
the day, cul-de-sacs were a trend. They're not trending now. There might come a time and a place where a future board will be sitting here again.
I can see that.
Whatever development is left to even be developed, and they might decide
can
that
see
cul-de-sacs are the way to go back to again,
Or
so.
tall skinny houses.
Who knows?
Or story,
Right.
like Fort Collins.
So the final, last method that we've introduced for greater connectivity is
Skinny ones, like Fort Collins house?
would be connections to adjacent parcels. Currently, we require connections every 1,320 feet, approximately quarter mile, which again is really insufficient if you want to have the greater connectivity. So what we've done is we've mirrored the block length that would apply also to your connections to your adjacent parcel. So for all of these standards, there is some flexibility that's needed when there's things like topography, unique environmental features, existing street pattern, things like that, where we have built in some of that flexibility for when those unique things are present. So that's connectivity. If there's questions on that, I can move on to the open space.
When you talk about the connectivity, are you speaking strictly in terms of vehicle?
These standards are for roads. Roads include sidewalks and often bike lanes. So it's for all modes, but there are other, I guess it doesn't specifically say trails in this section. I believe in kind
Well,
of.
I guess to me, you can have pedestrian and trail connectivity,
Mm-hmm.
even when there's cul-de-sacs or things like that, where vehicles can't.
Right.
But I guess I'm wondering if this is striking the right balance between increasing connectivity versus neighborhoods that are just a giant spur of cul-de-sacs, but also not creating those situations where, I mean, Walnut, for an example, is a residential street, but you can go from Highway 257 to, 15th Street is basically where it ends being connected to something. And that street is probably one of our biggest areas of complaint because people get upset about the amount of traffic coming down that road, speeds of people coming down that road. So if all of a sudden we're promoting this greater connectivity, do we go too far? And now we've got a whole town full of Walnut Streets complaining about, I want more police patrols, I want speed bumps, I want dips, I want all these things because there's too many people who don't live on this street using it to get from point A to point B. And I guess that's my only concern is this new method finding that right balance?
Right, and I think it's trying to encourage just that. I mean, you bring up a great point, but I think that that's the issue now, is that we have too few Walnut Streets.
There's only one Walnut.
You know, and
Right.
so everybody's kind of focused there, so if we had more connectivity, then it's not, you can have 20% of traffic on 5 streets versus 100% on one. So I think that's really, you're saying exactly what we're trying to achieve. Now, I don't know if this code gets us there, but that's really well stated on what we're trying to achieve here.
But that kind of gets to the point that I'm struggling with a little bit here, because it feels like I'm looking at this almost in isolation compared to what our overall transportation patterns, because they either help or conflict with each other. So I'm struggling with see how this helps with our master transportation plans, which we haven't seen yet. So,
This is new development, so that might be.
but it's still laying out potential traffic patterns. Yeah.
Well, it's,
So I'm not complaining, I'm just saying, I'm trying to get a picture of how this 20 years from now eliminates completely complaining about another Walnut.
right.
Because your point's right on, I mean.
Yeah, the transportation master plan will get into things like the traffic calming means that Cindy just referred to. But These are really more block standards, block lengths and things like that. The transportation master plan is what will get into specific roads and areas in Windsor.
And these
So
connect to those.
they're light, yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
To go back to Cindy's question a little bit, Scott mentioned the traffic calming. So ideally, when we're building new streets, they won't be replicas of Walnut. They'll have curb bump outs that kind of slow traffic. They'll have other design features that discourage the real high traffic or speeds. And another component is the volume of traffic. And new streets that are built in a subdivision don't really allow driveway access onto streets over a certain volume, because you do get the conflicts of people coming out and also the complaints. So hopefully those are addressed in that manner. So open space is the next topic area within subdivisions. Eric, this one's for you.
Thanks.
Open space and parks are next two, and then Eric can go. So open space conservation is a theme throughout the comprehensive plan. I think, as you're probably all aware, the code doesn't really require any open space with development. The only exception being multifamily does require some open space. It's really insufficient, and it doesn't specify quality or type of open space, really. So the draft code requires all residential development except for large estate type homes to set aside 20% land area as open space. And this would be owned and maintained by either a metropolitan district or a homeowners association. So they would not be dedicating it to the town for maintenance. Currently, most subdivisions in Windsor do have at least 20% open space, so we don't feel like this is a big ask. The space is already out there in most subdivisions, between storm drainage, stormwater facilities, trails, amenities that developers provide, things like that. The space is out there, so what we're looking at doing is making sure it continues to be provided, but that it's also of a high quality and a usable nature, and not just a stormwater detention basin that you don't want to go play in or take your kids to. Having these serve dual functions where they're aesthetic and usable spaces, but also maybe can serve things like stormwater. So there's a number of different types of open space that could meet this requirement. A green belt really being kind of like a trail corridor, things like that. Natural habitat areas, something like a pocket park, which is really just a small neighborhood type park. Stormwater facilities, as I mentioned. Other amenities that a developer might provide, like a swimming pool, clubhouse, things like that. Or a town park that's dedicated to meet park requirements. So that's kind of the big picture concept on open space. And then I want to jump into parks to cover that, and then we can jump back to any questions.
But all of this new recommendation still would be owned and maintained by the HOA or the Metro District or somebody else other than the town?
Correct.
Okay.
Except the town park.
Right.
Except the what?
Town park.
Well, yes.
The town park.
Right.
But we're not really headed in that direction
Okay, talk a little bit more about pocket, okay,
Or-
we're gonna talk more about, I got questions about pocket
Yeah.
parks, so.
So we'll talk parks a little bit, and then
Yeah.
hopefully that'll answer questions. So in order to facilitate construction of public parks, the town code currently requires developers to dedicate land to the town, and then the town will come in at some later date and construct a park. The Parks Department has indicated, and I think you all have been probably involved in this conversation, of moving away from the neighborhood park concept due to, I think, maintenance and cost of having a park in every neighborhood, and really focusing on more of the regional and community parks, which are the larger parks with more amenities and focusing resources on those. So in order to continue to provide more of a neighborhood scale, the code is proposing the pocket park concept. And these would also be maintained and owned by an HOA or a metro district. So there would be a requirement based on the zone district and number of units for the square footage of pocket park required. The numbers here, so for example, 10,000 square feet per 200 units in SF1. So something like the Village East development, a newer neighborhood in Windsor. I want to say they have around somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 units currently. And they have a town park in there under kind of the new concept that Parks has pursued. There wouldn't be a town park there anymore, but potentially there could be a pocket park that would be more of a privately maintained park. So residents would still have some amenity that's closer by. The square footage required, it's, in my opinion, it's very conservative. We could go higher if we wanted to, compared to some other communities that have similar requirements. 10,000 square feet is, you know, lots around Old Town are maybe around 8,000 square feet on average. So it's not a huge area, but it provides some amenity. I think it's also not a huge ask of developers in terms of size. Cost and ongoing maintenance, I think that is a consideration for them. So that's the concept. So I guess we can go back. Any questions on open space or pocket parks?
Dr. Jones?
You and me.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, let me ask you, we have how many neighborhood parks now on the books that are undeveloped?
4.
There are 4 left, and our plan is to develop them.
Absolutely.
Okay,
We've
eventually.
agreed with the developers that we will build them upon the build out of that subdivision, with the exception of one, which is the Jacoby Farm, so it's not tied into a development. It's just, we now physically own the park, and so that one probably gets done in another year or so.
Okay, so then we'll switch to pocket parks.
Yes.
Or we'll do that
Well,
now in new development.
In new development, but to clarify, when we say wheel switch, the switch is, to think to the mayor's point, it's on the HOA or the metro district to build. It would not be ours to
Right.
build or maintain.
Right, I understand, but
Yes.
that'll be the new requirement.
Correct.
And the park fees will stay the same?
Park fees stay the same, which help build out the larger community parks as they're needed over time.
Okay, and for a while, some of that's gonna have to go to the neighborhood parks we've approved.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we have the funds to do that.
Okay, and now, how big are Village East and the Windshire?
Village East is 3 acres, Windshire's 4.
Yeah, see, I'm having trouble visualizing 10,000 square feet. It doesn't seem like a heck of a lot.
It is not, and a pocket park is designed to be extremely small, and quite honestly, it really goes to a social equity piece for people in that neighborhood who maybe would have to travel a little farther to go to a park, even a neighborhood park. This provides them a space. An example would be Windshire subdivision as you're driving west on Jacoby Road. There's a detention basin there that very rarely holds water. We even have football teams that will practice there. It's a small little area, but you could go throw a ball to your dog, something like that, or sit and read a book, low maintenance, that kind of thing.
So you think that would be plenty to accommodate 200
Yes.
residential
Yes.
units?
And they could do a pop-up, like the picture in the upper right, you could do a pop-up event there. You could put up a movie screen, you could bring in a food truck, you could have a birthday party there. Super low maintenance, not a big space, but allows the local, almost like the micro level, where you could go do something really close to your home and not travel to a park if you didn't want to, or didn't have the ability to.
I think part of the rationale that planning has behind this is if you're approving a lot of smaller lots that don't have a lot of, people don't have big backyards or areas where they can throw the frisbee or something like this. This is really to accommodate that and to also, you know, if you're in a neighborhood that doesn't have a neighborhood park, like the pop-up event or National Night Out, if they need a place in that neighborhood, it gives them at least enough room to have those type of events as well.
Okay, so just to clarify and make sure I'm following this properly. So Village East, as it was built, it's roughly 200 units, and they have about a 3-acre park?
They have a 3-acre park.
Okay, so if my math's right, a 3-acre park, 43,000 square feet, so that's about 130,000 square foot park. If that same subdivision was going to be built today, they would only be required to have a 10,000 square foot pocket park.
Well, I would say if it were built today, they'd be
Well,
required.
okay, post-adoption of
Right,
this.
so, well, today it'd be 0, post-adoption, 10,000.
Today, that we would not require a park. We would use the funds that we would get from park development towards trails and community parks.
But we perhaps would not have got here to this point if we did not have a park within, what, a 10-minute
Correct. We have
walk. I mean, so we've identified that we have that in place, which we have established that, you know, that meets probably the most basic need for a park in almost every, you know, everywhere in our community and neighborhood. So I think that's, I mean, I don't think we would have got here, I mean, what is that, 24?
We have 26 parks
20.
total.
So if we maybe only had 18, we might not be here yet, because we might say, gee, we still, you know, we don't have enough to, but I think because of where we're at, and we want to focus our attention on what you're calling community, regional, does that include just open space though, or is that a whole separate other something?
That's separate, so this would be the Toconcalla, Lebu, what would have been Diamond Valley, Eastern
Okay.
Park.
But some of these new aspects where we're going though, not only do we want to keep thinking about community and regional parks, but we also, I think, want to think about preservation of just
Yes.
open space.
Correct.
So where does that fit into any of this discussion or picture? Is that,
Yeah, that was the first component, the previous slide of this kind of open space.
so that does include, that would include, they could dedicate just some amenity and not really do anything, but dedicate it and keep it as a natural whatever.
Well, that wouldn't replace a pocket park
Correct.
by dedicating other open space.
It would be required open space,
And
you
the
require a pocket park. The
Right.
pocket park could count as a portion of your open space.
So the pocket park is required? I thought that was an option.
Pocket park would be required.
Required, and that could be a part of your 20%.
Right.
Okay.
So the other piece of my question then is, I know with some of the more recent subdivisions, they were given waivers from the land dedication for neighborhood parks because they were going to build and maintain a Metro District park. And I know one of the requirements with that was always that those parks remain open to the public. Would that same requirement be on these pocket parks?
That's the intent, yes.
Okay. And what does that do with them being Metro District or HOA owned and maintained in terms of playground safety standards and maintenance, accessibility issues, as well as use for public events like the movie in the park or things like that?
Eric, you wanna?
Sure, so in terms of standards like ADA, accessibility or playground, there are national guidelines out there that folks like that are expected to follow. If they didn't, someone could make a complaint to them and really put some public pressure on them to say, hey, this is a hazardous playground, that kind of thing. There's no law that says that they must do it and can be held, what they would do is lose in court. So if my child died on a playground that was not safe, I would sue them and most likely win if they weren't following the national guidelines.
So just from a liability standpoint, they're going to most likely follow
They
those
would follow it,
guidelines.
But would it even get that far? I mean, we don't have to look at their pocket park plan and do some kind of approval?
That's one.
I mean, it wouldn't even get to that point, would it, where it could even maybe be something so totally
We do
unsafe?
not, so for example, the Rain Dance, Water Valley, we do not inspect their playgrounds.
We don't, okay.
It is
So
on
that
them
is, they can
to-
do whatever they,
Correct, they have to, they should build it to national standards and they should do annual inspections.
That's kind of a question I had about all these. Do we have any town standards, if it's a natural habitat or stormwater facility? Well, stormwater we would, but, or is it just up to the developer to do what they want?
Yeah, so there are some standards proposed in the code.
Okay.
Great, stormwater, you know, we
It's gotta
have,
be regular, yeah.
we have the more engineering-based standards
Yeah,
currently, of,
yeah.
you know, from a functional perspective. What's introduced in this draft is more of the aesthetic of designing it in more of a naturalistic way, introducing some of those standards.
Yeah. Now, let me be clear on the point that the mayor asked earlier on the pocket parks. When you say park, the public perception is it's ours, it's the town.
Yeah.
I want to make certain that we are not doing the maintenance and upkeep and stuff like that.
I think Eric would throw a fit if,
I think-
It is,
Yeah.
to your point though, there,
Yeah.
we do get phone calls.
Sure.
When
If it's called a park.
other parks
Right,
who the public may perceive that are
Right.
ours, that, hey, I don't know, the mulch hasn't been replenished and it looks
Right.
bad and there's, you know, big
Right.
dips under the swings, we will take those phone calls and then we just redirect them to the Metro District.
And if they don't do anything about it,
call your metro district.
We try to
We
call
have
them and
no
say, hey, you need to do the
enforcement.
right thing.
Right. Good enforcement.
do you let them know though at that
Yes.
time that
Yeah,
that's a, okay?
It's happened a few times, but not very.
Yeah.
I think for the most part, the ones that exist today do a pretty darn good job
They
of
do.
keeping the standard up.
Just to clarify, Paul, based kind of on Cindy's comment, so if you took a pocket park, like the one pictured in the top right, that's put in by the Fancy Neighborhood HOA, maintained by them, but open to the public, could Eric hold a pop-up movie theater night for Windsor residents there?
I think he'd have to work with the HOA and be invited, yeah.
Typically, they've asked, we would not ask them, in most cases, I would never say never, but they have asked us if we would come to them and provide an event.
So they are open to the public, so even if you don't live in the neighborhood, there's not normally a prohibition from you going there and using them. But if it were gonna be a sanctioned town event, we wouldn't just pop in there
Right.
without.
Correct.
And
And I was gonna add to that, we don't market them as ours either. So for example, if you look at a park map currently, we don't show the Water Valley Park on our map, even though it is open to the public. We don't show it as if it's ours because of the perception.
how does that work in terms of regulations of the park, like things like liquor, leash laws, things like that?
That's all the Metro District.
So if they would allow people to wind up shots in the park shelter, they could do that?
Yes.
Okay.
As long as it wasn't against the town code.
I have a question. On that retention pond on Jacoby,
Mhm.
it's really nice that they can go in there and throw the ball and frisbee. That doesn't look like a park to me. Like, should there be,
It isn't designed as one, it is stormwater, but I use that as an example of
The size?
the way they built it in the size.
Okay.
That it could be used if a developer chose to do that, you could throw your ball or your dog down there. If they chose to do more of the natural habitat, it would accomplish the same goal.
but if somebody's putting in a pocket park, I think, are there no minimum requirements that we're gonna, like, you need so many trees or?
Yeah, so we did include some pretty basic requirements of, you need to have a lawn area, you need to have some seating area, you need to have some sort of play area, whether it's basketball court or something else. That's-
My other question was on, what about a smaller development? There's one out by my neighborhood. I don't know what it's called. About 30 and 5. They're gonna have single family, they're gonna have some town.
Yeah.
Is that, it doesn't meet a 100-unit threshold, I don't believe. Maybe it does. Would they wouldn't be required to have a park, but they would require open space?
I'm not remembering off the top of my head, but the intent, I think, is regardless of size, you're providing a pocket park. There may need to be some very minimum, you know, if you're doing 10
Okay.
lots, maybe you're not doing a park, but.
Okay, I just saw that grid you put up, it said 200 units, 100 units.
Right, and that's more of a ratio of, if you have 100 units, you provide this much.
If you have 50 units, yeah.
Right.
On the open space, the 20% requirement. What was the feedback from stakeholders, and could they just leave bare ground?
Stakeholder response, we haven't, this was sent out about 3 weeks ago to them. I
Okay.
haven't received any
Okay,
negative or positive comments on it.
if they just leave a 20% dirt field,
Yeah, so
is
that
that
would.
okay, or?
No, that would not qualify as
So
one.
It's natural.
They have to be, it's natural, yeah,
Right, farm.
right, yeah, right. Or could it be farm? Maybe kind of cool.
So Ridge West just put in like a pocket park type of thing. It was kind of a trail that was already there to a pond. They went and added like a structure, barbecue, various other things. No playground, but they do have the sign up, you know, Ridge West residents only. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
But, you know, it seems normal to, you know, I didn't bat an eye at it. But is that something, but here you're saying like a pocket park would be open to the public. I wonder if do we go back to existing neighborhoods? I guess that's something to think about. And say,
I don't think you could go back. I think
Yeah.
all those are gonna have to be grandfathered
Yeah,
in, where
to the
however they
rules.
are. I don't think you can go back and make that kind of demand from
Yeah.
folks
There's a lot.
after the
yeah.
fact.
Because old rules, we didn't have the rules in place yet.
I think it's got potential, especially depending on where it was laid out. I can see if it's close to the trail system, you know, it could be a really nice feature in some of our neighborhoods. I just, the devil's in the details of this, you know, and just,
And that's another concept that
Yeah.
didn't make it in the draft code, but it is something that we're wanting to include is kind of corridors.
Yeah.
Using these natural areas as corridors to connect to town parks or to the pocket parks. So it's kind of a connected network.
yeah, that's kind of concept I was thinking about when I was talking about traffic patterns, I mean, too, corridors and connectivity things. I see opportunities to do that, but we're not there yet.
It's not in the language yet, but it will be, yeah.
Okay.
So is that all you have for
That's-
connectivity or open space?
That's all I got on Parks Open Space. Unless there's other questions, then
Okay.
Eric can go enjoy the rest of his night.
Well, then I better ask my question.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to go, go ahead.
Connectivity sort of came up in a number of different places. And when I saw the word, I thought it was going to be a larger connectivity issue about looking at the entire town and saying, how do we connect this to this to this? And it certainly seemed that if you had a big piece of land today that you knew someday was going to be subdivided, and you said, boy, wouldn't it be nice to have a trail going through this? When it was subdivided, you say, okay, but you're gonna build this piece of the trail as part of your subdivision, and when this one's done, oh, and you're gonna build this piece of the trail. So that you really have this broader connectivity plan that you kind of hinted at just now when you said this idea of having pathways, and sidewalks and things to connect. It just feels to me like that is a critical piece, to have a bunch of pocket parks and not get from one to the other, or at least a subdivision where you haven't ahead of time dedicated or identified the path that you'll need to connect these two community parks. I almost feel like that really has to be part of this thought process, which means you need to draw up your master connectivity plan and overlay it on, you know, the town and say, okay, well, we're part of, and the reason, I was waiting until later because your review criteria specifically mentions parks and open space in compliance with their requirements. I think that should also say, and connectivity and paths, bike paths in compliance with the broader connectivity plan.
Yeah, we can.
So, go ahead.
Couple of quick things, so yes, we can do that. The Trails Master Plan does lay out kind of the master framework of where there will be trails. I think we could expand upon that for kind of greenfield subdivisions where there
Right.
maybe isn't a trail corridor planned, well, you should provide one. And then the transportation master plan is also looking at the bigger picture of connectivity, and while this is more kind of internally focused within a development, the bigger picture is in documents like the TMP.
Yeah. Well, when you guys built the Bison Ridge neighborhood park, they had to add trails so the other neighborhoods could get to it.
And connect to the one in the neighborhood next door.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the idea.
Because
I'm
the
just saying,
roads are not
neighborhood by
connected, so we
neighborhood,
had to add the
have them
trail.
all connect to a broader, larger.
Paul's spot on. It's really a three-pronged approach that we've got going right now, which is the TMP, the existing trails master plan, which is that big layover. Within the TMP, what I think you'll see come out, as I remember doing the exercise right outside the door on the second floor, where we laid out this massive map, and staff laid down wire and everything to show all the connectivity pieces, and then obviously tie the code in. Each one of those prongs that he stated will do exactly what you're describing, which is ensure the connectivity as we continue to grow from all these neighborhoods that don't exist yet, get people to major trail corridors, parks, destinations.
But I didn't see that language in the code.
No.
And so your review criteria, if in fact it added or included also, that you develop the paths in keeping with this broader plan as one of the review criteria, I think that now it's there. Now it is part of the conversation when you're looking at a subdivision or a PUD.
This is my frustration I expressed earlier, was trying to get my head around this piece, which is really a small piece of a bigger picture. And without seeing the master transportation plan and all that, it's hard to picture, is this going to get us to where we want in terms of traffic pattern and connectivity, all phases of connectivity. So that's a big question. And you're suggesting that it's there.
Yeah,
I just don't see, okay.
Right. I mean, obviously the other staff can jump in.
And
I
you're saying
feel
it'll be
confident
language,
that it
a
is.
little stronger language in here that requires some
Well-
type of connectivity between neighborhoods.
The review criteria says parkland in
Yeah.
accordance with the code.
Yeah.
And it says open space in accordance with chapter 17.
Well,
But it doesn't say anything about it.
And again, this is the board's first review of this. This is pretty new.
Right.
So we appreciate the feedback and we hear it, and I think, okay, we can put that in the criteria, and when we're back in a few months, you put it in front of you, and you say, well, I like this idea, say, good, it was yours 3 months ago.
I'll forget by then. It's like, wow.
I'll take credit then.
Tell you.
Okay, so there's, I think, 3 more smaller concepts that are introduced as changes to the subdivision standards. The first being the double frontage lots, which by that I mean a lot that's, accessed from the front street, but it's also got a street essentially in the backyard. We want to try and avoid those, as you're left with examples like First Street and 7th Street, where it's really just kind of a row of fences and kind of this remnant parcel of weeds or whatever. Most subdivisions now are not doing that, but we just want to ensure that that continues to be the case. So if you do a double frontage lot, you have to put in a landscape tract that's owned and maintained by an HOA or metro district. So.
And let's go back to another concept we talked about a couple of years ago, gateways into the community. We talked about what they need to look like. That's kind of connected to this, I think, major arterials. The picture on the right is what we need to have.
Right.
So is the code being written that way that?
Yeah, that's, the example on the right is what we want, the example on the left is what we
Okay.
kind of.
All right, it just makes.
But maybe with less grass, because I
Sure.
mean, I'm looking at the right, and I see a lot of grass there.
Yeah.
And I don't think that follows our xeriscaping.
Right.
Because that takes a lot of water and a lot of mowing
Mowing.
and a lot of maintenance.
Yeah.
And it looks nice, but I don't know that it's that practical.
Right.
You
No,
can
the
have landscape
requirement
that
is,
looks nice, but doesn't take the water, absolutely.
the requirements for landscaping, not necessarily the grass, absolutely.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
So that's, I think, a pretty simple tweak that's, that we can make. Another concept, significantly encumbered lots. And this is essentially, it's an example we've run into recently when a residential subdivision is being platted and there's a An irrigation ditch in the backyard
Yeah.
is the prime example, but there could be other types of easements that really make the backyard unusable or really encumber the lot that the property owner doesn't really have full enjoyment of their lot. So in cases like that, we will not count that towards the minimum lot size. If half the backyard is tied up in some other use, they need to provide a larger lot or put that ditch in a separate tract. So again, I think a pretty minor tweak, but can be easily implemented.
Well, First Street, is there anything we can do about that? I mean, is that right away? Is that our right away? That all that gravel and weeds and stuff are, or is that part of their parcel?
I imagine most of that from the curb to the fence probably is right of way. I don't know.
I mean, we'd have to plant it or do whatever and maintain it, I know, but, like they talked about, 7th Street, First Street, or main arterials, entryways into town, and parts of them look pretty bad.
They need to look nice. I'm going to Parkway.
I'd go with that. Sure.
Use the
I'll
legend.
have to mention.
The legend.
Those two.
It just goes in circles.
Those two specific examples, First and 7th Street, will be discussed as bike corridors in the transportation master plan that we'll be getting to after the first of the year. And I imagine if the town board gives us direction to create those bikeways along those frontages, there will be improvements that could get into streetscape as well. So.
So the last concept in subdivisions is the public improvement security. And what this is, when a developer starts to build their subdivision, they go in and put roads, utilities in. We require security to ensure that they complete those improvements that are going to be dedicated to the town, that they complete them to our standards, so we're not taking on substandard infrastructure with problems. It also ensures that they don't walk away halfway through the development, leaving it in a dangerous or unsightly manner, so that worst case scenario, the town would have some money to go in and, if not totally complete the subdivision, at least get it in a better state of repair. The issue we've run into is the code requires 25% of the cost, which has shown to be too low. If the intent is to make sure these things get done, 25% is not going to ensure that that happens. So the proposal is to increase that to 100%. It's definitely going to be a big, I imagine we'll hear from stakeholders on that one. Fort Collins and Greeley both require 100%. Loveland requires 25%, so there is kind of a range of what communities require.
Paul, let me speak to that a little bit, just to give you a little bit more. My perspective is that when the developer shows up and the development agreements and the code refer to performance bonds, letters of credit, in some cases cash. I mean, we've handled it in a number of different ways. Back in the day, letters of credit were relatively easy to get from banks, but it required the developer to have those kinds of dollars on deposit. So that's what compressed and pressed down from 100% security to 25%. Was they said, look, if we have to do a letter of credit, we can't bond it, we can't post 100%. These days, what I'm seeing, and Kim sees it too, is the developers are going to sureties, they're going to insurance companies, and paying a premium we'll call it $25 for an insurance policy that's worth $100, so that they can still provide the security, but it's in the form of a bond, and they're not they're not depositing 100% of the $100, they're only paying the $25. It's like an insurance policy. And so I think the market has changed, the resources available to developers have changed, but they're going with performance bonds, surety bonds, payment bonds, all kinds of stuff that are more insurance based and not bank account based. So they may still not like 100% security, but the reason we dropped it to 25% had to do with that they were gonna have to set aside that much cash. Banks aren't doing that anymore. They're not issuing letters of credit. And so we're doing with insurance companies.
Well, and it's also important to note that, when I first started in this profession, the conventional wisdom was, well, no developer's gonna ever let you pull the bond, it's gonna tank, their credit. But as we started during the recession, we have had to pull these things. It does become real, and there is a public expectation that these amenities get finished. And so there is a big liability for the town if we just have 25% on the hook, so it really is our risk, but if we don't have enough security there, so.
And there's another, because I deal with this week in and week out. The engineers, particularly the stormwater folks, look at stormwater drainage improvements as being the kind of thing that a developer should not be able to walk away from. Even though in many cases we're not going to take it, we're not going to accept dedication of it. In a case where a developer starts building streets and laying out the curb and gutter and then goes belly up, what we want to make sure of is that stormwater improvements are done so that if there's an event, the water has somewhere to go. We may not care as much about curb and gutter and maybe gutter, but from a stormwater point of view, what I've said is we need to get security for stormwater improvements so that if there's a default, we can at least protect the public generally from a flooding event. So that's, even if you decide to walk away from 100% security for true public improvements, streets, curb, gutter, sidewalks, I still think you should seriously think about 100% security for stormwater improvements, because those are the kinds of things that if left unfinished can really cause problems.
I assume that they would be bonding, not paying out $200 million in cash, or whatever, so
Yeah.
I'm okay with 100%.
Yeah, and I think in general, the model is bonding.
Yeah.
But if what you want to do is say, well, if it's this kind of improvement, it's only some percentage. But when it comes to stormwater improvements, the engineers upstairs feel pretty strongly about a high amount of security to make sure stormwater gets done.
Are we talking about building a whole grid of roads with just finishing it for the developers without any homes being built?
Yeah, if they default on public improvements, they don't get building permits.
Right.
If we have to go in, I could foresee in worst case scenario, we might let streets just kind of sit, but the concern of the engineers is the storm.
I get that.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, but the intent is to build out the streets?
Yes. Yeah.
I think that's almost worse having a bunch of empty streets than a big dirt lot.
Yeah, I think depends on where they're at in the process when they potentially walk away. If it's a bunch of open trenches for water and sewer lines, that we've got to get somebody out there and address the public safety, so that's definitely the priority.
Would that stay in effect for the full year, like the warranty period, the final acceptance, that 100% would be available for that?
Yeah, and the current code says that once you get to construction acceptance and you're in the warranty period, the security drops a little bit, drops 60%.
60% of the 25%.
Of the 25. So we would, in theory, we could drop 60% of the 100%.
We've actually, I think we could probably do more than that. In warranties, I think you could get down to 15-20%.
We propose dropping it, I think, 90% down, so it's
Yeah,
at
to
10.
10.
Yeah, there you go. So, yeah, once you get to construction acceptance and we know the stuff's done and in place and has passed our initial inspections, then I can see seriously dropping it. But until that point, that's what this is all about.
So that's all on subdivisions. That was the last section for tonight, which is the procedure and administration.
So does anybody else have any questions? Anybody have any questions about the subdivisions? And again, this is just the first discussion. We're gonna still roll this out to the development community. We're gonna have more discussion and bring this back to the board. So don't feel like if you don't speak up tonight, you'll never see it again. That's not the case.
I was just curious about this Development Control Committee. Have they been in effect? Is this something new, or have they been around from?
No, this is new. Communities or a subdivision could have their own architectural control currently, and I'm sure many do. This is a new requirement, I believe, just in the RMU2 zone or in the PUD, where there are some of those higher standards. It's essentially helping us make sure that these standards are met, since requiring that the garage be set back, that would require us to look at every building permit. So what we're asking is they have a kind of a committee that says, yes, we're checking these. Here's our letter saying these 20 building permits have met the standards. So we're relying on them to do some of that review.
But they're bound by our rules for our standards.
The requirement is they review our standards and say yes or no, it's in conformance.
Okay, so it's not really like an HOA? Do they have any ability to control themselves or control what's in that subdivision themselves, or?
The intent is they're really looking at the town's requirements.
Oh.
They could take on that role additionally if they so desire, to have a HOA type committee.
Yeah, because HOAs, a lot of them do have a design review, so I kind of envisioned it being more incorporated into that. They would say, we reviewed it meets our standards, and within that would also be whatever standards they had to lay out for us.
Right.
So, I'm sorry, who would be on that committee?
That would be members of the community.
Of the community?
People who live in that subdivision.
Okay, but initially there are no residents. So
Right.
we're back to the Metro District issue.
Correct.
It's the developer and
Right.
friends.
Mm-hmm.
So-
Developer and friends.
And relatives.
Fellow investors.
I wasn't gonna say relatives.
And international friends.
I know, I was gonna bring that up. But, so basically it's self-policing.
It is, yes. I mean, we still have the ability to check as well.
If we found that they made a mistake, okay, we could, what's the due process?
If
I mean, they built 20 homes, we're trusting them to tell us that they did it according to our standards, because we don't have staff who can run out and look at every house every day. Got it?
I mean, we would kind of spot check, and if
Okay.
if-
Yeah, trust but verify is where I'm going with this.
Right.
Because most do a really good job, but there's a couple, in my experience, most of the people have not necessarily
if
self-policed
Yeah,
as
if
well as
they-
they could have.
if they prove to be
I see that tactfully enough? Okay,
if they prove to be untrustworthy, then I think we would be checking every permit. that
so
comes
we
in.
need some way to verify.
Mhm.
Okay.
I have one other question on the subdivisions with the green space and the pocket parks and that kind of thing. In this area, maybe this is a moot point because all the developers are going to a Metro District model, which is a more formal legal entity. But if you were to have one that was an HOA, what happens if that HOA goes defunct and dissolves, and then you've got this open space, this pocket park that now no one owns, no one takes care of? Is there something to kind of cover that?
Yeah,
Or is
would
that
you like to
enough
take a
of
stab at
a-
that one?
Would I like to take a stab at that?
Not like to, but
Yeah, I've seen it too. I mean,
Well, the subdivision next to ours, their HOA, I mean, they don't have any green space or anything, but that HOA just
the HOA
dissolved.
is either inactive or fully dissolved. Yeah, if we impose a requirement that that be owned and maintained by somebody, then the question is, well, what happens if it isn't? It could be that you acquire, that there's a process for enforcing it, and then there's some sort of a lien, that if we spend money to maintain it, or if we spend money to acquire it, that there's a lien on the remaining assets of the former developer, which is individual homeowners. So I think there's probably a way to encourage the HOA to remain alive and active if the threat is, if they don't, then we step in and make it fiscally uncomfortable for every one of those lot owners. So there, you know, as far as enforcement goes, it's a really good question. And I think probably it gets built into the fabric of the development agreement or the subdivision approval, so that if they fall down and we have to step in, there's some level of expense that we can lien all lots. And then they either pay their HOA or they pay us.
Well, and the third option is that we just say that's privately held, the town doesn't own that, it's up to you, and we just kind of.
It's an eyesore
Yeah.
at that point. And so, you know, I suppose where it's placed could matter in the overall subdivision planning, and I looked to Carlin and Paul and Scott to make certain that it's not on First Street, right? That it's not visible when you come into town, it's like, oh boy, that's gone to seed.
Situations like that. And what we've done is enforce it against the adjacent property owners. So, and because we have this issue come up with snow removal in certain areas like that, and you know, if the Metro District or the homeowner association isn't cleaning that sidewalk up, technically, per our code, it goes against the adjacent property owner.
And that's a code-based requirement, but this we're talking about building into the
Right,
fabric
we can
of
build it into
title.
the,
So that everybody who acquires the property recognizes the HOA needs to function, and if it doesn't, the cost of that eventually falls on the lot owners anyway. It's a really ugly situation, I know what you're talking about.
But in that enforcement mechanism is in our ordinances already.
Yeah,
If
we've
the
got
town has to perform something that is a private property owner's obligation.
the nuisance thing.
So you could
Yeah.
perhaps tie this over to that, which ends up with you potentially leaning the property.
But if you wind up leaning the eyesore property and can't lien
Oh, no, yeah,
the
yeah.
property of the people who are, under the terms of the subdivision, responsible for it,
Yeah.
then we wind up eventually in foreclosing and owning an eyesore, which we don't wanna do. We just wanna compel people to maintain things so they don't become an eyesore.
Yeah, when I think what Ms. Schumer said, that the first caveat is the right one, though. Really, the model we're seeing now are the metro districts, so it's less likely.
Right.
So I think we just need to think, if we put this code in, you know, to the extent that you have an HOA and not a metro district, you still have to have some mechanism to maintain it. So I think, I mean, really, it's, any developer coming in now is going to come in with that taxing authority, and so it's probably less likely now, but it's a real thing. I've definitely seen that happen time and again, where it's just an HOA, and they just stop meeting and stop maintaining, and then what are you going to do?
but then I think we have to, though, have some consideration for those homeowners, because is that really fair to them who bought into that, believing that their Metro District or their HOA, but then, you know, it defaults on them, because we already kind of have an issue, Ken and I do, with a particular Metro District, where they're putting the blame is on us, because we're the ones who granted that Metro District.
Yeah.
I mean, meaning the town board, we're the ones who authorized that Metro District to do what they're doing. And so then that means maybe in the future, we either have to be more careful, I mean, I don't know, I mean, it's that give and take, but I understand and I see the homeowner's perspective that, you know, how can you fault them when all of a sudden now, you know, what they thought they were maybe paying into or whatever, now they get another bill because, you know, so just be prepared for that, I think.
It's a can of worms, I agree,
Yeah.
Christine.
Anything else on subdivisions for our final section? So the last thing is procedure and administration sections. These are more concepts, and we'd really like your input on what direction you want to go. So first thing is public hearings for master plans. The code doesn't currently require a public hearing with a master plan, which can be problematic. Master plans are often done with an annexation, which does require the public hearing. But when they're amended later, or if they separate the two, public hearing isn't required, the public isn't really aware of what's going on.
And if I could just give the history on this one, Paul.
Yeah.
The code originally had annexations and master plans lumped together, and you couldn't do a master plan separately. And so when we heard from the community that we should be able to do a master plan separately. We separated annexations and master plans. We simply didn't add the public process specifically for master plans, and it was tied to just annexations. So what we're proposing here is to add the public hearing, the public process for master plans and master plan amendments when there isn't a concurrent annexation or subdivision process, because the neighborhood should be able to speak on any changes to a master plan. So.
And legally, I've always felt that you need a public hearing if it's quasi-judicial. You need your bookends that this group observes so closely that if it doesn't say there's a public hearing, then you've got this sort of mashed up deliberation plus evidence taking all in one thing. So just from a due process point of view, we do need a public hearing for master plans and master plan amendments.
So it's agreed. Sounds like.
Yeah, okay.
So the next item is the review body, and this is where I'm sure we'll have more discussion. So in order to provide a more streamlined development review process, we could shift some of the decision-making authority, for example, from town board to planning commission, or from planning commission to staff. This would reduce the number of meetings required for applicants and their consultants, so could save them some money and speed things up a little bit. So the chart that's on page 9 of 116 in your packets, and that's up here as well, it outlines our thought process on some changes that could be made. Conditional use permits other than oil and gas, we could see those going from town board to planning commission. I think for oil and gas, we want to keep the status quo. For site plans, we recently made a tweak in our process where they used to be presented to planning commission and town board, where they're now for qualified commercial industrial projects. They're now just more of the communications item in the packet. We would look to potentially expand that to multifamily site plans, because they're the only ones that currently still require action by planning commission and town board. Thought process more specifically on those being that once a project has its zoning in place, which would allow the multifamily, once it has a master plan, which again would require the public hearing for both of those, that's kind of the surrounding property owners, residents, that's kind of their best chance for input. And by actually having the site plan before you, it in some respects it gives neighbors false hope that you're going to deny a multifamily project when it's more maybe tweaks around the edges, if anything, that you'd be making, and that could be a role that staff would take on. Similar thinking for the subdivision process, where currently it's goes to planning commission. It's a two-step process. The preliminary subdivision goes to planning commission. If approved, then they come back with a final subdivision. That goes planning commission, town board. Thought process is planning commission could still review the preliminary. However, we would require a public hearing with that, which we don't currently require. We require the neighborhood meeting, which is kind of serves in lieu of that public hearing. But our thought process is we want to have kind of that engagement as early as possible in the process. That gives, I think, fairness to both sides. That gives a little more certainty to the developer, knowing what the issues are, as well as the neighbors giving them input early in the process. So requiring that public hearing up front, and we would then shift the final subdivision from currently it goes to town board that could be shifted to staff potentially. And the thought process again is it needs to be in substantial compliance with the preliminary plat. So if that's already been approved, there may not be a whole lot of reason for it to come back through the process once it's already gotten that approval from Planning Commission. So those are some options for streamlining. I think some of the surrounding jurisdictions have started to go this way to a certain extent. I know others, I feel like Fort Collins, for example, requires planning and zoning council action on most projects, maybe because they want to be more involved and have that say. So it's really, we're looking at you for what you want to see on this.
I have a question on actually the first two, on the CUG permit. What are some examples that we would no longer see? Would that be like a substation or?
Substation would be one. Another one you may recall a few years back, the piano teacher at home with the
Tutoring.
tutoring too many students at home.
So my first thought is, I think, while uncomfortable, I think these should come to the town board because they're deviating from the standard. That's the first point. And then on the site plan, would we still, for multifamily, would we still be able to see it in our packet like you do with the commercial? And would there be some sort of neighborhood appeal at that point, if, even though it is dancing around the edges, if it's something they want to appeal at that point?
Yeah. On your
like
first
maybe higher fencing or something?
Yeah, on your first question, yes, it could still be a communications item. On the second, you might look to the attorneys, would neighbors really have standing to appeal something on the site plan?
Depends on how you define who's aggrieved by it. You know, if you say any person aggrieved, they might say I'm aggrieved.
So why does it come to us currently if it's just the site? Like that's, I guess, what we're here for, right?
I think it's because the code was built to basically say, if we're talking multifamily, you should have a public hearing and you, the town board, should approve that site plan. All other commercial, non-residential site plans are staff level, but multifamily is different.
Well, so this goes back to the 90s when town board gave staff the direction to prioritize commercial and industrial projects. And so we created the fast track combined industrial commercial site plan process. And since multifamily residential isn't commercial or industrial, it remained the same, I guess. So it wasn't fast tracked, and that's why the difference between commercial industrial site plans and multifamily site plans.
Okay. Let me ask another way. If a neighbor has a problem with a site plan, where would their opportunity be to address that with, in a public setting?
Generally speaking, if they've got the underlying multifamily zoning, the use is already a vested right.
Got that.
And if they are meeting the site plan criteria, the open space, the parking, the landscaping, all of that, there really shouldn't be an issue that the neighbors, they may not like the project, but if it meets all of the code requirements, there really wouldn't be a reason for them to, I mean, they may not like the height or.
Well, and so put it in another way, I think they could show up to the town board meeting and say, we don't like X, Y, or Z, but if it met the code, I think it'd still be back to kind of the false hope of like, sorry, the code says this fence. So
I get that.
and that's kind of, it hasn't been said yet, but that's really, I think, the line that staff's try to draw with this is trying to find a balance of where should the public engagement be? You know, what pieces should still be really the engagement in the public hearing? And what pieces in our process are really technical in nature, when it's really, we're just applying code to it, and really, you know, having people show up and thinking, geez, I'm at a hearing, I'm gonna go up to the podium, and I'm gonna tell the board I vote against it. You know, when we're kind of back to other things, when the board's looking at us saying, well, sorry, but this is the height limit we're presented. You know, if this is what's in front of us, we hear you neighbors, but the code's the code.
But if they, just because they meet code, there might be other tweaks that could be made to address a neighbor concern that wouldn't compromise the project, or, I don't know what that might be, I'm just speculating.
But if it's in the packet, I mean, it's gonna show up on the agenda as part of communications. So if a neighbor wants to come speak about that item, when they,
We don't discuss them.
Although, I gotta tell you, it's so off the radar now. I don't think that, and it's all at the end of the packet.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think as somebody finds out, they're gonna find out after the fact, when this thing is like going up, and they're gonna say, where was my opportunity to come
Right.
and say something?
So the balance, the question, you're right on, I mean, I don't want to set people up thinking that they can come to us and say, I don't
Change
like
the site
this.
plan. I
Because I've had that conversation with neighbors, that if it meets the code, we can't say no. But I've also seen examples where there's been negotiation between neighbors and a development, and there's been some tweaking, like you said. So the challenge is, where do we allow the public to give some input on this without setting them up?
I think the
would
public,
I
something
don't
like
have an
that
answer,
still
though.
go through the major subdivision plating, where there would be a public hearing? Potentially?
If they needed to subdivide the property, but it could be a property that's already subdivided, so,
Yeah.
and it otherwise meets code. One of the reasons that, I guess the big reason why this is in the proposed code is, you'll recall when we went through the brands review, a lot of the processes were delegated to staff in the brands, and the thought was the brands west in Loveland had the same process, and we wanted to have parity, so to speak, so that both jurisdictions are looking at it in the same review process. And so this is kind of the next step, doing it outside the brands as well, to be, it's a similar process. It's what Loveland has done with their, I guess, moving to a more administrative review.
I think the big shocker comes is that neighbors probably most of the time don't know what the zoning is next to them.
Right.
Like, I doubt if the developer told, and the steeplechase told, he may not have known at the time that, you know, multifamily was right, gonna be right across the street.
Right.
Right.
So I mean, the public should be.
That was rezone.
It was a
What's that?
rezone.
That was a rezone.
The reason,
Yeah.
okay. But those neighbors were notified then, weren't they?
Yeah.
So there was a public hearing
Yeah.
for the rezone.
Yeah.
Okay, well, they had a chance for engagement.
They did.
Well, look at Soaring Eagle when we announced that the sports park was gonna be across the street. They didn't even know that that was already zoned for commercial, and all of a sudden they were completely up in arms, and it didn't even need to come before the town board, you know, under the curtains.
But I'm talking about the site plan, I get all that, I'm just thinking like,
It's a site
here's the
plan.
site plan,
Right.
and maybe it's, maybe.
One option that, and I'm just throwing this out there, we don't currently post any kind of sign for a multifamily project, do we?
It's not a public hearing.
Yeah, it's not a public hearing, there isn't really
It's
a
just a public
notification.
meeting.
If the town board wanted people to be more informed, we could start to post signs, you know, development under review, where they'd have the opportunity to contact staff, get on the website, see what's proposed.
You both have the same look on your face, you and Miles.
I guess we're not the
Can we
same.
make them not bright green anymore?
Carlin brought me in the public meeting is a good process, because what I've seen is people, first of all, they know something's going on, and they come, they ask questions.
But
And
they're
I've
not
seen
notified is the problem.
They're not
with that,
notified. I
Because it's
thought-
not a public hearing.
Okay, so they're not,
I think
somehow
he's
people
talking
find
about
out that there's a
the
public
neighborhood
meeting though.
Right,
They're
right.
notified within so many 100 feet or something, right?
And that's like if they were rezoning, but not for the site
Okay,
plan.
because it's the site plan.
But we
Okay.
could do neighborhood meeting.
But those have been affected because I've seen compromises made out of the result of those, so.
How much time is gonna be,
There's something in that process that works.
how much time would be streamlined with the new process? Like, I mean, you don't have to wait 2 weeks or a month for the town board to hear it? I mean, so just gonna move along that much quicker?
I would say maybe a month could be taken off, even if you're not doing the public hearings.
But the expectation is that their residents are coming to make changes to the site.
Right. It's just kind of setting them up sometimes.
Setting them up.
Right, I agree.
Yeah, I think sometimes too, it's just the certainty. I mean, I think the change with our current site plan, that I understand from developers is just feeling a little bit more certain with the plan, not feeling like somehow it's gonna be on the agenda and they're gonna have everything flipped after they've spent a lot of money.
Sure.
So even though that's not really what this board has done historically, they're still, without that threat there,
Yeah.
I think it just makes them feel a little bit better
Right.
about the process, you know?
How are our neighbors? I mean, does this not go through through their boards currently? Like,
I think-
does it go straight, does all multifamily go straight through staff?
I'd have to research those. I think Scott mentioned that Loveland's been moving in that direction where it is more staff-based.
And for a piece of clarification, so say something comes through and it's 15 feet above our normal height limit, are those things gonna come to the town board, or is it just things that meet our current codes would then go through the new process?
Yeah, so if they were seeking a height exception, I don't think we're proposing any change to that. It would go through the
Okay.
same process.
Except, would that be a conditional use permit? So now it's just gonna go to planning commission?
No,
It's a height review.
height review is
It's
separate.
a height review.
Oh, that would be
Separate
different?
process.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I guess it's not just height, I guess if there are exceptions to the code, could those exceptions go through with never being discussed on the town board, and are we okay with that?
I think it depends the level of exception. For example, I talked about in the RMU2, it requires a certain amount of commercial acreage. However, there's a built-in, you can receive an exception to this under these circumstances. Something like that would be more of a streamline, what it's not going to you. If we're seeking a variance, that would still go to Board of Adjustment.
Right.
If they're seeking a waiver to the design standards, I think that would likely still go to the board.
Okay.
Well,
That
and
makes
Paul, I
sense.
think it would be worthwhile, because this is a big concept, and I don't want to rush through this. I think it'd be good if we could maybe staff kind of develop that flow chart and just really, so we can have some more discussion as far as what sort of things would trigger to go back to the board, what things would be, you know, if we could just kind of give them some more concrete examples.
Yeah.
It may help this discussion for them to say, okay, thanks for the flow chart, I don't like it, don't change it, you know?
Well, and I'd like to, I mean, we've got some planning commission folks, and I don't know what your take is on these changes. Because you guys are kind of the first line of defense, really. I mean, most of these things generally or normally, at least previously, have come before you. But, you know, I want to hear from, you know, your full board and you guys now, if you have a perception of where this is headed. Does it not matter to you and what you're?
I think some of the streamlining things that have happened, especially with site plans, I think those have been good from a public standpoint because, well, I think you need to make sure that any public involvement pieces are happening on the front end early on, because I think there's that misperception. I mean, the public just typically doesn't understand quasi-judicial in general, but you get to that piece where they hear public hearing and they think they've got the potential to make this project not happen at all. And really, you know, like the tennis complex that in Highland Meadows, they were coming before us for a height variance and it was like 2 feet or something minuscule. And I think there was neighbors who came thinking they could make this not be built. And there was that misperception because of where it was in the process. And so I think any of those places where it's come far enough along in the process that the project is really a done deal and we're just tweaking details, I think anywhere those can be streamlined so that you're not giving a public misconception that they can put the brakes on it, I think is a good thing.
As long as they've had their chance at some
Right,
point.
in the early, at
Somewhere
the
else.
appropriate phase.
Yeah. I like the flow chart idea. Maybe highlighting this is public input here.
Right.
and the current flow versus proposed change.
Yeah.
You've got lots of red on that thing. Were you gonna go for it? This was gonna be your.
You can email those or.
So this, I mean, it says right here, get bread, milk, and lunch on the way home.
On the CUG item though,
Pay Excel.
I think it would depend, and maybe you just have a provision in there that it goes to planning, but maybe you have a provision that one of planning's options is to say, this is a big enough thing that really needs looked at by town board, and so it, you know, kind of have the three options that planning could say yay, nay, or we're referring this to town board.
That's
We get some hot potato.
Well, 'cause I mean,
Here you go.
I think it's good.
You guys make big bucks.
Miles had a great point, I really like the Avery Association. I mean, that's a big enough deal to where I really wouldn't want that to just go planning and zoning.
Yeah, that's what I
think
thought
that is.
too.
Yeah, but some planning and zoning may just be really comfortable making that decision.
All right.
Well, right, well, I'm just saying, if we
They're not
had,
elected,
if
there's
we
no
had some kind
ramification.
of,
I'm comfortable with it.
well, yeah.
With planning doing it?
Yeah. Staff all the way.
Well, 'cause I
So
think
we
with the
can't make
Avery,
good
you know,
points.
Let's be effective immediately.
You did. I think that not all conditional uses are created equal, and I think that if it were, you had somebody giving music lessons in their house, maybe that doesn't raise to the board's level, but something like a substation, it probably
Yeah,
does.
those music lessons are a really big deal to the neighbors.
They are.
They really are.
That was,
So for us, like, but I don't know, I just feel if they're deviating from the plan, maybe we should have to, it's not easy, I mean, it'd be easier to push it off.
Especially the drums.
Well, that's the general, so again, you know, tonight we're not making any decisions, we
Yeah.
can definitely develop that flow chart. I think we could show those inflection points of public input or no public input. The board can look at that and give us further direction.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we need to see,
Yeah.
have follow-up
Yeah.
further discussion.
Sounds good. So yeah,
while we're talking about CUGs, I'm gonna go specific, page 30. That's a single family residence, but it talks about item 3, conditional uses, childcare. It talks about, can be approved on a conditional use grant. Childcare, nursing home, a rest home, private commercial. I'm gonna ask a question. This is single family residence, and applies also in SF2, multifamily 1 and multifamily 2. What's the rationale, and under what conditions would we approve a heavy industry use in residential? Because it says oil and gas. And oil and gas is a heavy industry. What's the rationale, and under what conditions would we approve?
yeah, so.
Not just oil and gas, but any heavy industry within residential.
So this is kind of a two-part answer. The first being, all the uses that are in this document that's been shared with you
Yeah.
are essentially just what's currently in it.
Right.
And,
Okay.
you know, in a couple of months, we'll be back tweaking the uses in zone districts. But to answer your question, I think prior to the SB 181, whatever it was.
181.
Yeah.
Right.
You're familiar with it?
Yeah.
Oh, you're not.
Prior to that, I think.
What was that?
The town had zero authority to say you can't
Okay.
put a facility in a certain zone district. Whether we have that authority now, I think is maybe up in the air. So I'm not the one to answer that, but.
Okay, I am absolutely not opposed to oil and gas. You know, I rely on it a lot, okay? But I really question any type of heavy industry within residential neighborhoods. I think that deserves a lot more conversation than just blanketly approving this.
Yeah, and I think that's a separate conversation, because we're
I
not
think
proposing
so,
changes
too.
to it.
Yeah,
But it's,
I think we need to flesh that out.
yeah.
I agree.
I don't know if anybody else agrees or not, but.
Definitely
Yeah, definitely agree. Because, I mean, actually, you look at every zone, and oil and gas is allowed
Right.
with a CUG.
Right.
I mean, that's.
With a CUG.
Yeah, CBD, it's, you know,
In
downtown
a commercial.
area, residential, every
I know,
zone.
it is.
You know, years ago, we did only allow it in certain zone districts.
Right.
But based
Then the
on
state changed,
previous
right.
town council's advice,
Right.
recognizing that we didn't have that authority. We did
Right.
make it a conscious decision and make it a CUG in all zoning districts. Now with Senate Bill 181, there's more conversation to be had. I guess staff wasn't trying to make any oil and gas changes with this bigger code.
You were gonna take that on.
Because we didn't want to bog down the.
Sure,
the
I appreciate
overall
that.
upkeep.
But you know, it's ironic, we're talking about the landscaping on First or Seventh or places, you know, the bike paths and all that. And then you're gonna put an oil well in my neighborhood. So, you know, it just does, you know, it just doesn't make sense to me to have any heavy industrial operation within residential. And so I'm gonna pursue that question.
Staff doesn't disagree.
So I'll get that fixed.
Some staff or all staff? Like what's
No, we fully appreciate the compatibility issue that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think staff fully agrees that the board has some more conversation to have on this issue.
Right.
And you guys can figure out the right standard for the community based on that.
Tim, where we concur.
So just a few more items to run through. Minor subdivisions. So this is again looking at kind of streamlining and what qualifies as a minor subdivision versus a major. Minor is a completely administrative process, there's no public hearings. Currently, it's generally anything less than 6 lots if it's residential, or if it's commercial and there's a commercial industrial and there's a concurrent site plan, then it can be a minor subdivision. We've identified a few, 4 instances where perhaps it's too restrictive of what qualifies. So currently, anytime you want to dedicate an easement, you have to go to the major subdivision process according to the code, which really does not make sense. So we have to do kind of a backdoor workaround where they do the minor subdivision process, but then they dedicate plats, easements separately. So rather than doing that, we'd rather just clean up the process and have the easement on the plat. The next is dedicating right-of-way. And, okay, so I'm trying to recall the discussion here. Currently, you have to have a subdivision, major subdivision to dedicate right-of-way. There would be the option of dedicating right-of-way as a separate process from the subdivision, where subdivision can take place potentially administratively. Town board would still need to accept the right-of-way as taking on this asset, but it could be separated from the subdivision process. So just a potential streamline there. Also, when you're replatting lot lines of 6 or more lots, when you want to adjust the lot sizes, you know, we've seen examples of subdivisions that were platted, they were envisioning a certain product type. Years later, market changes, it doesn't work out. They need 5 more feet on each lot to fit their product. And they're doing it for more than 6 lots. Rather than going back to a public hearing, they should, we think, be able to do that administratively. And then also potentially non-residential subdivisions that do not have a concurrent site plan, if they're 5 or fewer lots. So kind of nearing the residential side. So that's that process, and I realize that's kind of a lot of stuff to take in, so we can look at doing kind of a similar flow chart, giving you more to digest and look at.
So Paul, I think what you're saying is these 4 bullet points would now be categorized as minor and be handled administratively?
They could be, yes, if that's the direction we want to go.
Could we make the oil and gas in a residential area, take it out and make it be on exception basis only? I mean, is that one of your options here?
I don't think we're having that discussion here on the minor subdivisions. That's,
Well, it's jumping back a little bit, I apologize for that,
yeah,
but. in
that's
general-
another, I mean, I think that's a future discussion. We're talking about minor subdivisions and these items in general.
So
I guess to Barry's point, do we have this oil and gas CUG process on a future agenda item, or how's that going?
Well, we've got, right now, we're still on air quality. The next meeting we have on the matter will be air quality again. We're still monitoring from staff side the state. You know, they are going through a lot of iterations themselves. And so we're kind of monitoring that. And so I think after we've got direction from the board on air quality, we're gonna take your next direction. So, you know, if you wanna review the CUG next, that's what we're gonna tee up and bring to you next. So, you know, I think that you guys have been clear on the different boxes, different checks you wanna do. And after we're done with air quality, I assume land use will be next, and CUG is what we're gonna talk about, but we're gonna take that direction.
It seems like the priority, considering a few of us have already said it, maybe shouldn't be involved in residential. Shouldn't that be part of this?
Land use, yeah.
Or is that
Well,
CUG?
I think it's a little bit.
That's a bigger discussion.
It is, and to me, it's just, that's a really specific thing, so when we're talking about this land use, we're talking, some general changes, the staff's recommending when it comes to oil and gas thing, clearly the board's talking about that right now, so, I wouldn't presume to interject any of that into this until the board said this is where we want to go.
So we'll get to that point though.
We will, absolutely.
I see any discussions about air quality, and we still don't know what the state's gonna do, but, you know, whatever directions we go with the state, I see that as separate as heavy industrial operations and residential. I see those as two separate issues. Because I'm not just picking on oil and gas, I mean, that happens to be the one that's in the writing here, but it could be any heavy industrial industry. I just strongly don't believe that should be in residential areas, and that's separate than talking about air quality for oil and gas.
Right, but I agree, I just wanted to again say that, at least my approach on this, what I'm trying to do is get through one thing at a
You're
time.
trying.
Well, there's
Yeah,
a
yeah, I
lot,
appreciate
this oil and gas is a lot, and I'm just, you know, we're here, you know, I mean, staff as far as the three of us trying to dig in and bring you guys stuff and let you make a decision, get direction, and so I don't know if the staff has capacity to run this along with our CUG process and other things. I mean, it would just be, you know, basically, don't work on anything but this for the next year. So anyway, I'm just trying to organize it as far as priorities we got back from the board and work through it. I understand if this board does not want to adopt any new regulations until we've addressed this, and make sure the new regs address whatever we want to address. I respect that and hear that, but it's just kind of how we're trunching it out and trying to bring
But
it
we're
back.
taking pieces out of the land use
Right.
code update, and what we're looking at right now are just these components. That's not the, that's not the only thing that we're gonna be looking at. But again, we're trying to do it, I think, somewhat methodically instead of, I mean, we could be here for a whole week if we wanted to take the whole thing on right now, but we're trying to take on pieces of, and conversations that we've recently had with regards to coming back to those.
We need to cross the bridge eventually. I heard at least 4 board members voice a concern about heavy industrial in a residential area. And I think I also heard that in the past we were preempted by the state, so even if we tried to say we didn't want it, we'd get preempted.
Right.
It would happen anyway, and I think even before they released the state rules, we now do have some local control as far as land use. So I don't wanna put it off for a year, you know, I'm fine if we don't do it right now, but
Right.
we need to have the discussion probably sooner than later.
Are you still on that page 30 for the heavy industrial?
I just
I'm
use
not
that as an
seeing that.
example.
It's all over in there.
It's in.
You gotta
4 or
go
5
to the
it's-
actual page of the, not the page
Not the
96.
present
Right,
section
but I
of
mean,
the-
I'm looking at the
Yeah.
conditional uses section and I see item F, oil and gas facilities, but
Right.
I'm not seeing anything about heavy industrial in that conditional uses section.
I said that oil and gas is a heavy industry. And so my position would be that we shouldn't allow any heavy industry within residential,
Gotcha.
not just picking on just oil and gas. Oil and gas comes up because we've made an exception for them.
Okay, I misunderstood
That's
what
why
you were
I'm-
saying
right.
because I was thinking
Right.
that was tied into.
No, like I said, I'm not trying to pick on oil and gas because
Okay.
we all benefit from it, okay? Yeah, but I just don't think, it is a heavy industry, and heavy industry should not be next to your house. It should be in residential areas. That's just not good town planning. And I go back, we talk about landscaping on First Street, and, you know, we're worried about that, but we're not worried about industry in my neighborhood. I mean, that just doesn't make sense to me, you know? Yeah.
So we get, so
Future discussion.
So it is,
Yeah.
but it's not gonna be a year. I mean, it's just really, I really do, we really talked about, let's get through the air quality.
Mhm.
Let's get some direction on that and, get that going, whatever that's gonna be. And then the next step, I think, is the CUG on the land use side. I mean, that's the next thing to really discuss, so. And it's not gonna be a year from now. I think that would be likely very early in 2020 when that's coming in front of.
What else did you?
So, 3 more things. Land use application referrals. Currently, we send out referrals on any land use or on most land use applications to utility providers, CDOT, neighboring jurisdictions in some cases. The code requires a response within 10 days, otherwise it's considered a no comment. That's proven to be problematic. It's too short of a turnaround. So we would increase that to 21 days, 3 weeks. Just give people that time to actually review and comment. The next thing.
Is that because, I mean, what do you think is increased their response time? Is it lack of staff? Is it everybody like is busy, has more than what, you know, more work than they can handle? Is it a combination of things?
I don't know. I would guess it's largely their workload and their staff versus the amount of what they're reviewing.
Yeah, I think the amount of, because every agency is like Windsor, where we're sending these comments out, and I think so just the amount of growth happening here, and I don't think the CDOT's adding staff to deal with that, so it's just the same amount of people, times more development stuff, so, you know, it is problematic for us, you know, if they don't get back to us. We say, well, we haven't heard back from CDOT, but this is what we hope they're gonna say. It's a little bit awkward.
How long are we given for referrals usually? Do you guys know? From other jurisdictions?
21 days is pretty.
21 days.
Standard.
Yeah, it seems reasonable.
Yep.
I think it's.
Would this timing change apply to all situations or only those where we need to get input or feedback from a third party?
It's just referring to those
Yeah, it's
third
just
party.
referral comments.
Yeah.
Next little tweak is neighborhood meeting timing. Code requires 30 days between the neighborhood meeting and planning commission consideration. That's often been kind of a point of contention for developers who are ready to move forward. So we're looking to compress that to 15 days. We do see value in having some time period, as it does allow people attending the neighborhood meeting kind of enough notice and time for them to plan to attend the public hearing, and also allows staff time to take in comments from the public meeting and consider those for the meeting. So.
Maybe once I see the flow chart, it'll make more sense, but if this is an opportunity for someone to make comment, I think shortening their time may not.
Well, it's not really an opportunity for comment. The neighborhood meeting happens.
Notification of the meeting.
No, it's the time between the neighborhood meeting and when planning commission hears it.
I think it actually helps them because it doesn't expand. There, you don't have that time gap,
Right.
where people can, I mean, you know, forget about whatever the discussion was, which happens very easily.
Do we notify the neighbors or does the developer have to?
Well, that's actually a good question, and we're looking at maybe tweaking that as well. Currently, the town puts the sign on the property, the applicant mails letters to them, and the town puts an ad in the newspaper. We're looking at potentially shifting all of that to the applicant, partially to take workload off staff, but also to kind of put that liability on them that they've checked all the boxes. And they would submit an affidavit that they've done those things.
How do they know who lives, the addresses of everybody within?
So we provide
We
that.
provide all that?
Yeah.
Did you guys think of expanding? I know we had discussion many years ago about expanding it. We had lots of pushback. Is there any, has that ever come up again, or?
Expanding the radius of
Yeah,
notice period?
'cause we had a lot of neighbors that said, you know, I didn't know about it because there's enough vacant land around the actual development and maybe only hit a couple homes.
Yeah.
Have you guys thought of that again, or is it?
Carlin, do you know, we have a few, for some applications it's 100 feet. I think most it's 300, and there might be one that's 500. Do you know which is which? And I mean, we've talked about
Yeah.
the idea of,
This 100 feet really doesn't, it really isn't
yeah,
much.
100 wasn't achieved.
We kinda got pushback on both sides, because the developer's like, you know, if they worry about the land, they'd see the sign and inquire. So.
Right.
It's on, they wanted the onus on the landowners.
I think the only one that was 100 feet was a variance process or something that it would really only apply, or it would only pertain to the immediate neighbors. It was the bigger CUGs and things like that that have the 300 feet.
But even Avery was 100 feet.
Mm.
Yeah, because oil and gas is 300, a regular CUG is only 100 feet.
So we'll look at that as well.
Yeah. And last thing I have for you, and thanks for your time and input tonight, is the review criteria for land use applications. So we currently really don't have a lot of criteria that's spelled out for individual applications. So for subdivision, for a site plan, what criteria they need to meet and what staff and board are looking at. So we think that's something we really need to include, so we know kind of what's on the table, what should be looked at. So I've included example criteria that we're looking at for subdivisions. And if you like kind of this approach and where it's headed, then we would do something similar for site plans and other applications. But so it's calling out consistency with the comprehensive plan, utility plans, things like that. Consistency with transportation plans, adequate utilities, provision of parks and open space, school sites, things like that. So yeah, any comments or feedback on that approach would be great.
Yeah, currently we more or less rely on intent statements that are at the top of each article. They don't get into the criteria that you really should have to base your decisions on.
And are these pretty standard as for some review criteria?
You mean, do most jurisdictions have them?
Yes.
I think any jurisdiction that has a more recent code probably has them.
And Paul, these are pretty much what we have in place right now.
Sorry?
These are pretty much what we have in place right now.
No, these are what's proposed to be
Proposed,
included.
okay.
Yeah.
I've had residents ask me about, relate to number 7, are adequate utilities available? Is that something, is that new, or I thought we had been doing that?
I don't know that it's spelled out in quite so literal terms.
Okay.
It would certainly be a concern if there isn't. We're going to say no.
The example has been,
We'll
your
get like
neighborhood,
will serve
because
letters.
several people have called from your neighborhood saying, geez, did the town realize that there was or was not enough electricity for our neighborhood? I mean,
Well, I just charged with my Christmas light, so it took me.
you're the one. No, but have we? I'm asking you, this is a question I've been getting from some constituents. Have we been asking the developer if there's adequate electricity?
So that's part of the referral process.
No.
So we do send some or applications to Excel or Poudre Valley REA.
Okay.
If they don't have the electricity, I don't know that we ever got it.
So we get a letter that says we will serve. We get a will serve letter.
From the utility
and
companies.
they confirm
The
whether
REA or-
it's sewer, water, whatever else,
Okay.
we do get that.
Okay, that's what I thought. So that's not really new, is it? We've
But
been-
it's done through the referral process, and it's not really a criteria
Okay.
that you're basing your decision
Okay.
on. It's something that staff follows up with the respective utilities, school districts, things like that. So we have that information, it's just not spelled out in the code as
Gotcha.
what you're
Okay.
relying on to make your decision.
Well, the plus, and I think, when we're looking at things at the board, and I had asked you guys to put the criteria up as the last slide. So as we're thinking through what we just heard, or the issue, we know we're measuring it against those. And I think putting that out, laying this out like this, is a benefit, because now everybody knows this is what you're gonna do. The downside is you forget one. Because we would always add one more that says, and any other thing that seems reasonable.
Well, and your request to have that slide up is one of the things that some of those sections of the code just don't have criteria, so we're pulling from those intent statements.
Yeah, I think on balance, you're better off having this. You can always point to it and say, this, we measured against these standards.
Versus looking a little bit subjective, maybe.
Right.
But of course, you have to add the connected trails.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's part of the criteria.
Let's get That's the trails. Transportation.
Okay, anything else?
That's all I have.
That's it?
What? Not one more point? Got one more point?
That was quick,
Okay,
wasn't it?
thank you.
Wait, I had a few
Did you really think it was gonna take 10 minutes?
Wait, let's open the camera up. David's got a few questions.
Okay, future meetings, we have no meeting next week because of Veterans Day. We're back on the 18th with a town board special meeting, final budget reviews, starting that at 4:30. Water rate discussion and stormwater fee discussion. So, anything else about future meetings, Mr. Hale?
No, Mayor, just that, their quality monitoring will be on November 25th. And then if we get some direction from that, we can certainly move on to this UG and the land use code, early in the next year.
Okay. So then we have next on our agenda an executive session. Do we want to take like a 10-minute
Yeah.
That's good.
break
Sure.
before we jump into that?
Good call.
Fingerprint interviews where you.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry.
Yeah.